Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Sixers, what an absolute treat we have today. When we talk about iron sharpens iron, this is the picture that I see. Our guest is the absolute textbook definition of that. Mikesarraille, not only was he in Marine Recon, not only is he a Navy SEAL, not only is he a massive business leader, but the lives that he lived and continues to live, jumping 7 continents in 7 days, is incredible. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the Got Your Six podcast.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me on.
One thing, I think the best place to start isn't like your humble beginnings in the Bay Area or, going to Boulder and then finding out the Marines is where you wanted to go. But I think the best place to start, and it speaks to what you do with Everyday Warrior over at Men's Journal, is really shared adversity. And how do we as people and, from all walks of life come together and find shared adversity?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. One, before we started this, we were talking about positivity. When I step into every relationship, I step in with nothing but positivity and hope, a wave. I'm going to ride that wave of hope that me and this person are going to connect. So stop looking for what differentiates you. And even if things do differentiate you, find the commonalities that can bring people together. But shared adversity is a concept that we have in spades in the military. And it's quite frankly the thing that builds or bonds that homecoming, belonging, and vulnerability. And you could go through Ranger School and you're in a specific class, but you meet somebody else who's like a year behind you, and you've already got that commonality, that understanding that you both went through hardship, maybe not at the same time, but those bonds are unbreakable, and it's even forged more by combat. But in the private sector, guys, and I've said this, the biggest missing factor that I've identified is shared adversity, because people come into a company, they don't go through any onboarding process. And when I say onboarding process, OCS, boot camp, those are the ultimate onboarding processes, which if businesses could replicate those in a way, because what boot camp and OCS teach you to do, in my perspective, is they teach you to live by a code. And that code are the your left and right handrails that, despite the circumstances, the situation you're facing, give you like broad doctrine. Hey, head in this direction, and most likely things will end up in your favor, or at least you'll come out with your integrity and character intact. Yeah, shared adversity in the private sector doesn't exist. And quite frankly, I didn't know it. 18 years when I left JSOC, I was at 18 years. I'm like, I was sort of bitter and done. And then I finally get into Austin around all these, civilian populace, no military guys around me. And I'm like, oh God, what have I done? I didn't realize what I had. And guys, you serving in the military right now, it's the best it's ever going to be. And that shouldn't make you sad at all. It should make you smile that you've had the fortunate pleasure to experience what the 99% never will.
How do you go in, because you've worked a lot, whether you were with Echelon Front and Jocko and Leaf and everybody doing the wonderful things there, or at Talent War Group, when you come into an organization and you're looking and assessing culture and the environment and community, more or less, how do you help kind of just pinpoint and reduce all the noise and focus on that one or two signal to get the team moving where they need to go?
The quality of the questions you ask in life results in the quality of the relationships you have. So it's no different than a command sergeant major or a commanding officer coming in, and within the first 30 days, unless they need to make immediate decisions, the good ones usually are going around, they're meeting everyone, trying to build genuine relationships, and they're asking very good questions. And it may seem intrusive at first, but it's amazing when you separate a platoon commander from the platoon sergeant, from the squad leaders, and you're asking these questions, how you start to get different stories and you're looking for patterns and the essence of what you're trying to get to. I'll give you an example. I can't name the company, but a Fortune 500 that everyone on this podcast knows. And they felt like they were having a culture issue. And so because COVID was a thing still, they wanted to do it virtually. So I had 60 of these, the entire C-suite and their senior VPs and executive vice presidents. And I started asking questions and I started to pick up on something. And I said, let me ask you one more question. How easily or how readily can you make a mistake within your corporation? And they all laughed like clockwork. And they said, Mike, if we admit a mistake, you put a bullseye on your back. And I said, then that's your problem. You need to create a culture where you put that bullseye to the front. And I said, let me tell you about the military. In the military, we promote it. We actually, we reward failure. If they did everything right, mitigated risk to the lowest level, and things just didn't work out in their favor, we help them learn. And in this thing we call the art of the debrief, even after a combat mission, if somebody did something wrong and they admit it, we don't say from the side, you freaking idiot, why'd you do that? You must feel stupid. We say, hey, no, man, thanks for sharing that. That could have ended up being more catastrophic than it did. Why'd you make those decisions based off the information you had? What'd you learn from it? And what would you share with the rest of us? And that's a bullseye in the front. Hey, let me tell you what I did wrong so that you all learn from my mistakes, or let me tell you what I did right so you can learn from my successes as well.
And
Questions?
that goes to the piece that I think a lot of people miss, because there's a lot of talk of like debriefs and AARs, and that's all well and great. But the piece that's always missing that we never talk about is the vulnerability. Being able to go in a room and be vulnerable. And I see you're smiling. I know you already got a story that you want to drop. Go ahead.
Well, hey, first off, Tony, let me tell you, like, if I speak with any confidence on the subject matters that we are discussing, none of it is proprietary information. There is no better organization at leadership development than the United States military. And if you want to go to the academy level, there's no better, platforms than that. We have this oral history of leadership passed down from generation to generation. It's an unbroken chain of excellence. So I am a product of the mentors that served above me and poured into me. More than so, I think the greatest mentorship takes place at the peer level. Squad leader to squad leader, platoon commander to platoon commander, platoon sergeant to platoon sergeant. If they're sharing their mistakes and successes, as you said, iron sharpens iron. But it was general, just as it comes, the brain trauma, it'll come to me. One of the early founders of Delta Force, not Charlie Beckwith, but Jerry Boykin.
That was going to be
General Jerry Boykin. Yep. And when I'm interviewing him for the talent war, he starts talking about this emotional intimacy amongst the operators at Delta Force. And I start to smile, and he stops in the interview and he's like, why are you smiling? I'm like, I'm sorry, sir. I've never heard anyone use the word emotional intimacy amongst military members. And he broke it down. He said, hey, you've lost guys on the battlefield. And usually the guy who was lost had a best friend in that outfit. What was that best friend doing when he got back outside the wires? I'm like, oh, he was in tears. What'd you do? I'm like, we rallied around him and hugged him and we grieved together. He said, that's emotional intimacy. That's vulnerability. And again, for hey, Hollywood does a bad job of painting military members. They always play to the lowest common denominator. And it keeps this perpetuating cycle going of civilians thinking that we're just dumb. When, oh, by the way, the U.S. Army provides more scholarships than any other organization in our land. We put a precedence on education. But, the most lethal warriors I knew at JSOC were the most kind, empathetic, respectful human beings. And they knew they felt comfortable enough to say, hey, man, something doesn't feel right. That kid that was wounded on target, I feel off. And that is the most courageous thing anything can do. And we say, okay, hey, man, that's natural. Those are the normal reactions to the abnormal conditions of war. Let's get you a health professional at the command. Let's start talking to him. If you want me to go with you, I'll go with you, man. We'll work through this. Nothing is, I was going to use the F word, nothing's screwed here. We're good. We can work through this.
This is the Got Your Six podcast. We make the rules. You can drop that if you need to. That's also recognizing too, when you might not misdiagnose, but as you look in somebody and you're building a relationship, you be like, I got that person wrong. Like I painted them in the wrong light off the jump. And you actually have a story about this when you were in Butts.
So basically you're bringing me on this podcast just to embarrass me. So no. One, for those listening, The 2 books I've written are not about me. They're not what I call the I love me books, and SEALs have a bad reputation for writing books. It's not about me whatsoever. If anything in the books, I talk about the things that I screwed up. Dr. Johnny Kim is one of them. If you don't know the story, I'm a Marine sergeant who's discharged and commissioned as a Navy ensign, former recon Marine, combat diver, scout sniper. And so naturally, the class sort of gravitated towards me because I was still very much.
And you also forgot that you were Lance Corporal, like you got promoted, you number 1 in your class, all that stuff.
So I was a sergeant. Yeah. But so I meet this little Asian kid, true to the stereotype, first generation Korean American from LA. His dad owned a liquor store. His dad also was an alcoholic, and I'll get to that. But so he just has sort of a passive tone to him. And I thought I knew what, a special operator looks like, and know how wrong I was, even to this day. So I'm like, this kid won't be here in a few weeks. Well, fast forward 2 months, 1 week, when we finished Hell Week, the 250 were down to 25. They secure us. I look down the line, and there's that little Asian kid just staring across the horizon. I'm like, okay. I was wrong. Well, we end up at SEAL Team 3 together, where I watch him run into the street to pull a wounded Iraqi soldier out, and he was awarded the Silver Star. Then we go back to the Battle of Sadr City in 2008, where he's awarded the Bronze Star of Valor. The Navy says, hey, you're doing a good job. We want to make you an officer. They sent him to the University of San Diego, where he got a 4.0 in mathematics. At that time, it's time to go to a SEAL team as an officer. He said, hey, I think I want to become a Navy doctor. We all know we need doctors. They said, hey, where do you think you can get in? I got into Harvard. He goes, becomes a Harvard-educated doctor, and then 3 years after he's a doctor, he applies for NASA. If you don't know, usually there's about 18 to 20,000 applicants, and they only select 12. He was one of 12, all by the age of 34. He did all this. And now I brag about Johnny Kim. And I told Johnny at one point, I'm like, I was wildly wrong. I thought you didn't have what it takes. What's even more interesting is he never told us his story until he went on the Jocko podcast. And his senior year of high school, he finally stood up to his dad in an alcoholic outrage. His dad said, get out of the house. He called the police. And when he went into his room, when the police got there, the attic entry is in his room and the door was out of place. He told the police officer, I think my dad's still here. Well, his dad had a pistol. There was a standoff and his dad was shot and killed. And I'm sure he carries that guilt, even though he shouldn't. And that was such a humbling event, much like all my combat tours of like, hey, the more I do this, the more I realize the less I know. And so I've got to recognize that I've got a lot of lessons learned, try to apply those to the situation, not force them, that each situation is unique, and then just make sound and timely decisions based off the information you have. And most of all, those guys you have around you, those men and women, I don't care if you're the ground force commander and you're a senior person, you can grab your 10 closest or next senior enlisted and say, hey guys, here's the situation. Here's what we know. What do you think we should do? It's a brain trust. Use it. And we don't do a good job in OCS of telling the officers, hey, at the end of the day, you do have to make a decision. But if you have time, if time's a luxury, you've got guys with multiple deployments, more deployments than you, ask them. Ask them. That's not weakness. That's actually a strength, tapping in to other people's knowledge. And a lot of times, no, every single time, it was my guys that had the good idea, which we went with, never me. I like to say, Tony, I was always the bridesmaid, never the bride. I was never the fastest, strongest, best shot, tactical, best jumper, but man, I was proud to be part of a team and do whatever I could to contribute towards that team's victory. Bottom line.
Different weddings, but I feel the exact same way. But I want to touch on that part because it's not groupthink, but it's that natural curiosity. And it's not something that's just applied to the military too. It's something that's extremely coveted in the private sector, right? HP looks at curiosity as the number one indicator of performance. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we interviewed Tracy Keogh, who is the CHRO of HP, and she's a legend in the human resources area. And she's a Harvard MBA who cut her teeth in sales. And because she was such a high performer, one of her CEOs said, I need you to go take HR and unscrew it. And she did, and eventually made it to HP. She's the one that found Meg Whitman. She called it the fire in the belly. And she said, and we all know this, and I'll use an analogy, not to pick on like senior enlisted guys, but it also applies to senior officers. She said the best employees were the ones that have already been there for 20 years that still question the way that they did things, or if there was a better way. Question with the intent of making the organization and the process better, not just being a dissenter to dissent, not being the guy that just makes everything a battle. That gets exhausting and nobody wants you around. But being open to criticism is key. You almost have to, like, I when I tell new people that come on, whether they were my soldiers or in my business, is you have opinions, no matter your age or experience level. You have perspectives. I need you to voice up when you think we're doing something wrong, or even ask, why are we approaching it that way? Because if you do that, I may rethink my thought processes as well. But we all know in the military, and this is no different than the private sector, when people get tenure, well, I'm at E8 or I'm an E9 or I'm an 05, 06 with 20 years in, we're just going to do things the way we've always done them. Those are the most dangerous words that can come out of any senior leader's mouth. Hey, I'm all about tradition. But if tradition is no longer relevant, if tradition is no longer going to produce results, guess what? We're going to change that tradition, and it's going to go to the wayside.
Especially with the operational environment, whether it's in combat or wherever you find yourself, it's constantly changing. And when you start to understand that we live life in the transitions, you start to accept a lot of things are happening, but it's how we react to those situations that are super impactful. Do you have a time where you had to learn that same lesson?
Plenty. One's not coming to mind, which is my lack of caffeine at this point.
Well, I'm sure because like we said, you were in Solder City in 08 when it was absolutely hot. And then you've also found yourself behind multiple boardrooms where the intensity is a little bit different. The stakes are much different, but the amount of passion and the amount of combat in a different sense of people like trying to fight and understand how to move forward together as a group is similar in a sense. And I'm not trying to, I know I just related combat to the real world and they're very different things. And you and I both agree.
Business is combat by nonviolent means.
It is, but we never wish combat on our worst enemy because we've seen what that looks like. But when it comes to business, it absolutely is a different kind of combat.
It's a different type of animal. And, finding talent in the business world is so excruciatingly hard because there's a lack of process to really test it. The private sector is a very litigious situation, and it's hard to push people outside their mental and physical comfort zones in the interview process. And everyone sells well or will talk themselves up. And of course, they put references on an email that are going to sing them accolades. And there's a different way to go about reference checking those by asking good questions. It's, you know what, man, I will take passion, drive, effective intelligence over pedigree any day of the week. The hardest thing to find is drive. That is just, you can't create drive where none exists. And it's a long nurture process to create that within people. Though the military has, the Marines, clearly the best service of all four. I'm joking, guys.
Debatable.
Yeah, debatable. Funny enough, they bred us to hate the Army in boot camp. They told all the stories about I can imagine how the Army left behind equipment and the Marine Corps picked it up in Korea. And then I go and work with the first of the 506 for really my first time working with the Army in 06 in the Battle of Ramadi. And I'm like, these guys are awesome. I have no clue what the Marine Corps was talking about. I don't know why they would do that. Ron Clark, then Lieutenant Colonel Ron Clark, who I think is now a 3-star, 4-star, one of the best leaders in the military that I've ever worked with.
Former division commander of mine, absolute stud.
Yeah, we kept saying, sure, you should, at the time in 06, we're like, you need to become the first black president, bottom line. And I saw him, he came out for the Michael Mansour commissioning the ship, and he gave the best speech out of all the SEALs that went up. It was actually embarrassing for the SEAL community. Ron Clark just smashed us all. We were happy to have him there. But it is definitely a culture shock moving from the military, where we put a precedence on certain things, to civilian society that puts precedence on different things. And I think that's why most veterans have a hard time. I mean, you're leaving a tribe, you're leaving a support mechanism, a tribe, and you're never going to have bonds like that again. And then you step in, you get your DD 214, end up on your mom's couch, wake up, and you're like, what the hell do I do now? And nothing is the same. And there's just no good answer for that, other than sometimes movement is key. Just take one step at a time. Just keep moving forward. You're going to get a lot of no's, but just no matter what, keep moving forward. And eventually things will start to solidify and become a little more stable in this thing we call transition.
What's the saying? It's if you're overthinking, move. If you're underthinking, right? Right.
Yeah.
So like taking some sort of action in either. Go ahead.
Well, I had a good story from a pilot. He was a Marine Corps fighter pilot, and this guy had the just best mindset. He sent something like 1,000 emails to a specific company. He went on LinkedIn and found everyone that worked for that company and said, hey, if you give me 5 minutes, I would just love to pick your brain. He ended up getting hired by that company. He just had no quit. He had total drive, and he was going to do whatever it took to get a job in that company. He's no longer with the company because he got a much better offer from a company that saw the work he was doing. It's just keep moving. And for some vets, man, if you want to take 6 months off to find yourself, because I mean, the military is your DNA. It will forever be part of your DNA. And to ask the question you asked yourself, we were talking about when you were at Cornell, who am I without the uniform? You're no different, man. And that's why I came up with the term everyday warrior, because I went through a dark time when I was at UT going through the MBA program. And I worked with a psychologist who said, well, what's the problem? I'm like, I don't feel like a warrior anymore. He's like, why? I'm not carrying a gun. I'm not in combat. He said, well, why was being a warrior ever about carrying a gun and going to combat? And I said, what do you mean? He's like, I thought warriors were like, being a warrior was about a mindset. And I'm like, I know this. I knew this for 2 years. How did I lose sight of who I was and everything? I mean, the military taught us to be successful in anything we do. If you follow that playbook, that culture playbook known as the U.S. military, you're going to be successful, and you apply it, you're going to be successful. It's not going to be easy, but no, being a warrior is about a mindset, and you are no different than who you were wearing a uniform. You just got to find ways to apply yourself differently. You got to find your next passion. And for some people, that's easier than others.
Absolutely. And, constantly, the more times you raise your right hand in the military, the deeper you get into tribe. And, whether it's going, you raise your right hand, you go to air assault school, airborne school, ranger school, whatever. And that's across the services. But coming out, what allowed you to find your tribe outside of the military that didn't really have a military connection?
Yeah, I sort of forced myself to stop. Well, hey, I still hang out with veterans. I gravitate towards veterans, which is seeing these expeditions we do because there's a commonality. But I had to force myself. When I was active duty, I didn't care about friends outside the military at all. I had my tribe and I didn't care. But I'm like, you know what? That doesn't work anymore. And so in the MBA program, getting to know the other, I say kids, they were in their young 20s. Or mid 20s to late 20s. I was 40, so I was an old man on campus. Is getting to know them, asking about questions about their life, their experiences, because they had more private sector experience than I did. They were warriors within their respective professions, and I had to respect that. And I learned more from those 27-year-olds than they probably learned from me. But getting to sit down with business leaders who never served in the military and who have done very well, and listen to their stories. And the most dangerous thing you can do is take advice from a veteran who's only like 5 to 7 years out of the military. Which, guess what? I'm only out of the military 5 years.
2017.
We're still figuring it out, dude.
Yeah. And so now that you've kind of been slightly removed from service, you've had all this time in service. I know you're constantly challenging yourself. How are you better today, Mike, than yesterday?
I've had a lot of time to reflect, and I keep looking back at my military service and saying, okay, now that I'm separated, let's really reflect and ask yourself some hard questions. What did you learn? How could you have handled that better? How could you have behaved differently to have a better relationship with your senior enlisted advisor on that last rotation where we just were at each other's throats? It's easy to point fingers at him and say he was just an asshole. No, there were things I could have done differently as well. And then also, how did we lead? And I don't think I could articulate how we led in the military all that well if you asked me about a month out. And now some things are just clicking. Like when people ask, how'd you lead in the military? They have this preconceived notion that I just bark orders. And I said, no, you have it all wrong. We lead through love in the military. And don't make no mistake, the best leaders, the Sam Damons from Once an Eagle, who loved his men and also held his men accountable. I said, I love my men and women a lot more than I hated the enemy. And what people don't understand about love is that the highest form of love or compassion is accountability. Much like if you have children, if you see your child do something wrong, hopefully you do it in a professional, sort of the Socratic method. Hey, why did you decide to do that? Yeah. How did that impact the people around you? Do you feel good about that? And help them learn from it. At the end of the day, as a parent, you're trying to create a future adult who is a good contributing member to society, but more importantly, who can stand on their own 2 feet without you. It's no different than your soldiers. It's no different than your direct reports in the company. You've got to maintain that standard because you love them. Because if you allow them to shave a little off that standard, you're condoning bad behaviors. At the end of the day, leadership and culture are about behaviors. Leadership is about behavior at an individual level. Culture is behavior at mass or scale. And so that accountability, those standards are key. And man, the military does that better than anyone. Because we know if you allow standards to slide, soldiers will die when it matters most. In the business world, if you don't uphold standards, your business will fail, you'll hemorrhage talent, and you'll eventually declare bankruptcy. That's how that works.
Couldn't think of a better place to kind of end the episode, Mike. Like, extremely powerful. Where can people go to learn more about what you're doing, what you're up to, what's going on with Everyday Warrior, everything?
Yeah, I'm having fun. So don't get me wrong. I've started a number of companies that were failure by textbook definition, and that's where I learned the most. And Talent War Group is a leadership development and executive search. So we do have a line where we place high-performing veterans into small to medium-sized businesses in general management to C-suite positions, and we've done very well with that. I love the leadership development, especially the experiential leadership development, because we know in the military, leadership development is a progressive, sequential series of events that lead to the great leaders that we create. Legacy Expeditions is to uphold the legacies of our fallen by taking the veterans that are alive that knew those fallen and doing something fun, still following the military playbook and mitigating risk down to the lowest level. Like we went and jumped into, skydived into Mount Everest. That's risky, but we prepared for 1 week of jumps in Colorado to make sure that we were all prepared for the task. And we have a partnership with Dan Myrick, who's the famed director, producer of the Blair Witch Project. And he documents these, and I love this guy. I'd never served in the military, but he's 60 and he wants to leave a legacy of his own telling these stories. And then Men's Journal, heard of my concept, The Everyday Warrior, picked it up. And I'm having fun with that. Conversations with people from a wide variety of domains where I'm learning from, again, these warriors within their perspective or their respective professions. And it's amazing when you talk to high performers, they leave these breadcrumbs. And man, I'm like the guy picking up like pennies on the street. I will collect those breadcrumbs. Some will work for me, some won't. But if you follow them, again, much like our code in the military, you increase the probability of being successful. You can follow me, Men's Journal, Everyday Warrior, Talent War Group on Instagram. But Tony, can you allow me to say something to the military members? Because this is a unique podcast. I'm usually not on military podcasts. Hey, to the generation serving, you guys are better than my generation. Bottom line. That's the whole point. You guys are smarter. You're more physically fit. You're more mentally fit. And even though you may not have the GWAT like we did, we were GWAT babies, your opportunity will come. And if you've done everything right, if you've upheld that standard both individually and for a unit, you will rise to the occasion. Don't let our generation or any other previous generation, like they told me, like we're a bunch of wimps. Just disregard that. And at the end of the day, your legacy within the military is determined by how well you trained the junior leaders below you to pick that torch up and actually accelerate the military at a greater rate than you did. And that shouldn't hurt your ego. That should build your ego up. That's the whole point. Leave the place better than you found it.
Mike, I can't thank you enough for your strategies, your tactics, your methods, and most importantly, I speak on behalf of the Sixers. Thank you so much for having our six. Really appreciate it, brother.
Thank you, brother.
I tried to